She trusted him. The night that went viral forever. That line captures the horrifying core of what happened to 17-year-old Bianca Devins. It's a story that begins like a modern teenage dream, a concert, friends, social media, and ends in a nightmare that didn't just happen in private. It was broadcast to the world. This case is more than a murder. It's a brutal collision of real-world violence and the digital age, making it one of the most shocking murders of our time. July 13, 2019, started with excitement. Bianca Devins, a creative and artistic 17 years old from Utica, New York, went with a friend and a 21-year-old man named Brandon Clark to a concert in New York City. They'd met online just months before. The night was supposed to be fun. But on the drive back home to Utica, something shifted. An argument erupted. The trigger, according to friends and later court records, was a kiss. Bianca had kissed another friend at the concert, a casual, teenage moment. For Brandon Clark, it was an unforgivable betrayal. That argument festered in the early hours of July 14th. The details of what was said are locked in the memories of the two people in that car. But the outcome was catastrophic. Sometime before dawn, in a vehicle in Utica, Brandon Clark's jealousy and rage exploded. He attacked Bianca with a knife, stabbing her in the neck. But the horror didn't stop with the murder. In an act that would define this case and shock the world, Brandon Clark did something unthinkable. He took out his phone. He took graphic, horrific photographs of Bianca's body. And then he posted them. He shared these images on Instagram and on the online chat platform Discord, with captions that boasted of what he had done, while Bianca's family slept, unaware their daughter was gone. Her murder was becoming viral content. Strangers across the internet saw the images before they could be taken down. Some were horrified and immediately alerted authorities. Others, in the darkest corners of the web, shared and spread them further. Bianca Devins was not just a victim of a crime. She was being violated all over again in the digital sphere. As these images circulated, Clark himself made a call. At around 7 a.m., he dialed 911. He told the operator he had committed a murder-suicide. When police and paramedics arrived at the scene, they found a gruesome tableau. Brandon Clark was alive, suffering from a self-inflicted stab wound to his own neck. Nearby, under a green tarp, they found the body of Bianca Devins in a matter of hours. A local crime had become a global internet sensation for all the worst reasons. The police had a suspect in custody and a crime scene. But they also had a new, modern problem. A murder that had already been documented and distributed by the killer himself, leaving a trail of digital evidence and unimaginable trauma for a family that was just beginning to learn the truth. To understand the profound violation of this crime, you have to understand who Bianca Devins was. Not just a victim in a viral post, but a living, breathing teenager with a future she was actively building. Bianca Michelle Devins was 17 years old, a girl from Utica, New York, on the cusp of everything. She was artistic. She loved to draw and create. She had a sharp, thoughtful mind and plans to study psychology at Mohawk Valley Community College in the fall. She wanted to understand people, to help others navigate the complexities of the mind. Her family knew she had her struggles, like many teenagers. She dealt with depression and anxiety, but she was facing it, supported by her family, and looking forward to what came next. But Bianca's world, like for so many of her generation, was also vividly digital. She was active on Instagram, where she cultivated a following. She wasn't just scrolling. She was participating, sharing pieces of her life, her art, her thoughts. She was part of online communities, places where people connected over shared interests, fandoms, and identities. For Bianca, the internet wasn't a separate space. It was an extension of her social world, a place for expression and connection, This is what makes the crime against her so particularly cruel. The platform she used for creativity and connection became the vector for her ultimate violation. The online presence she curated was hijacked and turned into a gallery of her murder. The communities she might have visited for solace became, in some dark corners, distributors of her death images. Family described her as a typical teen, in many ways navigating friendships, thinking about college, figuring herself out. But she was also perceptive and empathetic, qualities that drew people to her, both in person and online. This digital savviness, however, also placed her in spaces where boundaries could blur and identities could be curated, for better or worse. It was in this interconnected world that she met Brandon Clark. Their connection wasn't forged in a classroom or a local hangout. It was sparked through Instagram DMs and online chats, a modern meeting that would lead to a tragically old-fashioned kind of violence. Bianca's story forces us to look at a painful duality. The online world offered her a platform for her voice and art. It also exposed her to risks that were harder for the adults in her life to see and understand. Her murder isn't just a story about a jealous boyfriend. It's a story about what happens when obsessive, toxic relationships are nurtured in the frictionless, always accessible realm of social media, and how a life lived partly online can be exploited in the most horrific way imaginable after death. The relationship between Bianca Devins and Brandon Clark was, from the outside, a modern digital romance. They met on Instagram in the spring of 2019. He was 21. She was 17. They lived close enough for their online connection to become a real-world one. But beneath the surface of shared interests and late-night chats, this was not a healthy partnership. It was a dynamic laced with control, obsession, and a dangerous imbalance. Friends and family of Bianca would later describe the relationship as intense and unhealthy. Clark, 4 years older, seemed to cling to her with a possessive jealousy. There were reports that he provided her with drugs, a classic tactic of manipulation creating a dependency, blurring boundaries, making her feel indebted or trapped within the connection. Bianca, according to those who knew her, did not view Clark as a serious, committed boyfriend. To her, he was someone she was seeing, a part of her social world, but not the central figure he desperately wanted to be. This disconnect in their perceptions of the relationship created a volatile foundation. Clark's behavior hinted at a troubling fixation. His online activity, later examined by investigators, showed searches related to violence and anatomy-specific chilling queries about how to kill and how to find a major artery. This wasn't the idle curiosity of a true crime fan. This was practical research. It suggests the violence of July 14th wasn't a purely spontaneous explosion of rage, but an act that had simmered in his mind, possibly for weeks. The concert night became the catalyst. Attending a show in New York City should have been a highlight. But for Clark, who saw Bianca as his possession, her casual kiss with another friend was an unpardonable act of disloyalty. It publicly challenged his illusion of control. The argument that began on the drive back to Utica wasn't just a disagreement. It was the sound of his fragile ego shattering. In his mind, Bianca wasn't just pulling away. She was humiliating him, rejecting the ownership he felt he had over her. This toxic brew obsession, a perceived loss of control, jealous rage, and a mind that had already researched violence, created a deadly pressure cooker. When they were alone together in the early morning hours, that pressure found its release. The murder was an act of ultimate possession. If he couldn't control her in life, in the way he demanded, he would exert the final, absolute control over her in death. And then, in a final grotesque twist of this warped logic, he would use the very tool of their connection, social media, to make his act of ownership permanent and public, branding the crime with his digital signature for the world to see. The early morning of July 14, 2019, played out across two parallel crime scenes, the physical one in Utica and the digital one that spread across the internet in real time. While Bianca Devins lay under a tarp, her murder was already becoming a global spectacle, documented by the killer himself. After stabbing Bianca, Brandon Clark's next actions were methodical and chillingly performative. He took out his phone. He photographed her body. He then logged onto the internet. He posted the graphic images to his Instagram story and to a Discord server, accompanied by captions that were both boastful and despairing. This was not an attempt to hide his crime. It was a deliberate act of broadcasting it. He was creating evidence against himself, but more disturbingly, he was seeking an audience. In his mind, this private act of violence needed a public stage. The digital fallout was immediate and chaotic. On Discord, a platform used by gamers and online communities, users in the server where Clark posted saw the horrific images. Some, recognizing this was real and not some sick joke, sprang into action. They began frantically trying to report the posts to Discord moderators, and crucially, to locate Bianca and alert police. They shared screenshots and information in other online spaces, trying to triangulate her location to save her, not yet knowing they were too late. Simultaneously, the images began to leak onto other platforms. They were shared on Twitter, on Reddit, on image hosting sites. The internet's dark reflex to spread shocking content without regard for the human being at its center kicked in. Hashtags related to the crime began to trend. For a terrifying window of time, the murder of a teenage girl was viral content. While this digital storm raged, the physical world intervened. Around 7 a.m., Clark placed a 911 call. He told the operator, "I committed murder-suicide." When police and paramedics arrived at the location he provided, they found the scene exactly as described, but with Clark still alive, suffering from a self-inflicted neck wound. Next to his vehicle, under a green tarp, they discovered Bianca's body. The investigation that followed was uniquely modern. Detectives had to become digital archaeologists. They secured Clark's phone and online accounts, tracing the path of the posts. They reviewed his search history, uncovering those ominous premeditation queries about killing and anatomy. They also had to contend with the nightmare faced by Bianca's family. While they grieved, they had to plead with the world to stop sharing the images of their murdered daughter. The crime scene wasn't just cordoned off with police tape. It had to be scrubbed from the internet, an impossible task. This chapter of the story reveals a new facet of violence in the 21st century. The murder weapon was a knife, but the method of inflicting lasting trauma was a smartphone. Clark didn't just take Bianca's life. He weaponized her death against her memory and her family's peace, using the connectivity of the modern world to amplify the cruelty exponentially in the wake of the murder. The pursuit of justice unfolded on two fronts: the slow, formal process of the criminal justice system and the urgent, public battle against the digital desecration of Bianca's memory. For the Devins family, grief was compounded by a relentless, secondary trauma. Brandon Clark's path through the courts was marked by the grim weight of the evidence against him. Initially, he pleaded not guilty in July 2019, a stance that forced the prosecution to precisely prepare a case built on the digital and physical evidence. However, the reality was inescapable. The 911 call was a confession. His phone contained the horrific photos and the search history that hinted at premeditation. The timeline from the concert was clear. Faced with this mountain of proof, Clark changed his plea. On February 10, 2020, in the Oneida County courtroom, he stood before Judge Michael L. Dwyer and uttered the word guilty to the charge of second-degree murder. For Bianca's family, the guilty plea prevented the agony of a trial. sparing them from hearing the graphic details dissected in public. But it also meant Clark never had to offer a public explanation or express remorse in a witness box. The silence where an apology should have been was its own kind of punishment. The sentencing hearing on March 16, 2021, was the family's chance to speak directly to the court and to Clark, Kim Devins. Bianca's mother delivered a victim impact statement that laid bare the totality of their loss. She spoke not only of the vibrant daughter stolen from them, the artist, the aspiring psychologist, the loving sister, but of the unique cruelty inflicted after her death. She described the horror of learning that images of her murdered child were circulating online, of having to plead with strangers to stop sharing them, of the way the digital violation renewed their grief every day. She urged the judge to impose the maximum sentence, stating that Clark's actions had shown a depth of depravity that warranted no leniency. Judge Dwyer agreed, citing the heinous, brutal, and senseless nature of the crime, and specifically condemning Clark's decision to broadcast the victim's death on social media for notoriety. He sentenced Brandon Andrew Clark to 25 years to life in state prison. The sentence meant Clark would be eligible for parole in approximately 2046. At the age of 48, for Bianca's family, it was a measure of accountability. But as her mother stated outside the courthouse, there is no winning here. We don't get Bianca back. Yet from this profound loss, the Devins family chose to forge a legacy of protection for others. They refused to let Bianca be remembered only as a viral hashtag. They became vocal advocates, and their efforts catalyzed concrete legislative change. They campaigned for a law that would criminalize the very act that had caused them so much additional pain, the non-consensual distribution of graphic images of crime victims. Fight resulted in Bianca's Law, New York State Penal Law Section 245.15, signed by Governor Kathy Hochul in 2022. The law made it a misdemeanor to disseminate images of a crime victim who is identifiable and depicted in a harmful way, with the intent to harass or degrade that victim or their family. More broadly, it placed increased pressure on social media platforms to establish clear and rapid protocols for removing such exploitative content. It was a direct response to the failure of systems that allowed Bianca's images to spread, and it established New York as a leader in combating this specific form of digital abuse. The family also looked to Bianca's own dreams to shape her legacy. They established the Bianca Devins Memorial Scholarship, awarded to students in the Utica area pursuing studies in psychology or mental health advocacy. In this way, they supported others in following the path Bianca herself had chosen, turning their personal tragedy into an investment in future healers. The murder of Bianca Devins was a watershed moment that exposed a dark intersection of intimate partner violence and digital culture. It sparked national and international debates about the responsibilities of social media companies, the ethics of sharing violent content, and the unique vulnerabilities of teenagers navigating relationships forged online. It highlighted how a perpetrator could use the tools of connection as weapons of ultimate humiliation and control. She trusted him. The night that went viral forever. This case forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about trust in the digital age, the lethal potential of obsessive jealousy, and our collective role as consumers of online content. Bianca's story is a permanent reminder to look beyond the screen, to recognize the signs of coercive control, and to demand that our digital spaces have safeguards against such profound cruelty. Her memory endures not in the shocking images her killer shared, but in the law that bears her name, the scholarships that forward her dreams, and the ongoing conversation about how to build a kinder, more responsible online world. It is a legacy that insists on humanity in the face of inhumanity. Thank you for watching.